Welcome to the FemiNinja Project. I am your host, Cheryl I Love, middle-aged ninja hiding in plain sight, dedicated to restoring human dignity one person at a time and helping you unleash your personal power. Discover that it's possible to look like a woman, act like a lady, move like a ninja, and think like a warrior. And remember, men are always welcome on the FemiNinja Project. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. I have a fantastic guest for you today, a woman who I really admire, I respect, and she has some wonderful insights that she can share with us regarding health, healing, and recovering from trauma. Her name is Elva Edwards, Dr. Elva Edwards. She is a chiropractor, but she is so much more than that. So I'll let her fill you in on some of the details. So welcome, Elva.
Thank you so much. I appreciate coming.
I'm so happy to have you here on the show today, and I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
Well, I enjoyed the last time we got together, so I've been looking forward to it too.
We were together for like 2 hours.
Something like that.
We just kept on talking and going and everything. Well, as I said, you're a chiropractor, but that just doesn't really cover the incredible skill set that you have. And you have a remarkable background that is what triggered you into this life of healing and this lifelong learning. So I'm just going to start by having you tell us a little bit about that incident.
Well, I do feel that most of us, whatever profession we're in, it's because of something. Mm-hmm. There's a reason we're there. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I came into chiropractic because I needed healing. I just didn't understand what kind of healing I needed, particularly. But, when I was born and my parents had waited a while to have kids, not by choice, but by necessity during the war and so forth. And I was the second child, and one night we were going to see my grandparents on the other, just 30 miles away, and we were in a really tragic accident where 5 adults died that night, and it was my mother, my father, and my grandmother. And so I, went to live with my grandparents. The ones we were going to see came to the farm to live with my sister and I, and grow us up, and we had really probably idyllic kind of life in that, we were on a farm. Of course, I didn't realize it at the time, but we were on a farm. We had chickens. We, we weren't world travelers or anything like that, but there was a lot of peace and a lot of love. My grandparents had 3 other children besides my father, and so I was really close to all my aunts and uncles and their children. There were 8 of us grandchildren, and so I was very close to all of them. It made a really great family life,
But still there was something missing, of course.
Of course, there was still the trauma.
And you were very young.
I was 19 months.
And your sister was?
My sister was almost 4. And, we were in the accident, too. It's just that we were the only people that lived.
Wow.
Well, there was the driver of the other car, and it was full of bootleg whiskey. And they were bootleggers driving the back roads with their lights out and drunk. And didn't stop at a stop sign and pulled right in front of my dad, and he hit them. But the driver also lived, but it killed his passengers, which was a cousin and her husband, and left 10 children orphaned in that family. So that night, 5 adults died and 12 children were orphaned. And it was a big trauma for years. It took years to settle down, even in our family. But, I was little. I was 19 months. And so by the time, I didn't really remember it,
So did your sister remember it?
No.
Okay.
No.
And I'm going to go into this. We can talk about this a little bit later, but I read your book because you did write a book about it, and the title is A Texas Tragedy, Orphaned by Bootleggers. And I think it's important to just let our listeners know, of course, it was a dry county, obviously.
Well, yeah, it was a dry county. Yeah. In fact, That county only became wet about 2 years ago.
Wow.
It's a small West Texas town, and
Mm-hmm.
the town I'm from is called Tahoka, and it's the county seat.
Mm-hmm.
But it's only about 3,000 people, something like
Mm-hmm.
that. And back in the day when I grew up there, it was kind of a bustling little town, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
And but you know how it's kind of gone the way of a lot of small towns. It's just kind of bare bones now,
Mm-hmm.
but still a lovely community. And
Yeah, and what I was going to bring up too, but I got myself sidetracked, I do that a lot, is that there was also a family that responded to the scene because they heard the crash.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And one of them was a 10-year-old boy. It was their
Right.
son. And he was deeply traumatized.
He was probably traumatized. I mean, I can't say too much about what had happened, but I do know that when, as it turned out, an article was written about me by an Associated Press writer, and it went out over the state of Texas about me actually confronting him about a series of articles he wrote about Pinky, the greatest, biggest bootlegger in West Texas. And he was the boss of the man that,
Killed your family.
killed my family. And so I had a few problems with that. And it is all talked about in the book, but basically, when I actually had the opportunity to confront him, and we had quite a conversation, and actually I began to realize he wasn't the bad guy. He wasn't the enemy, but
The reporter.
right, yeah. And
He had some missing facts. He
he
didn't.
had some missing
Because no one
facts,
told him.
because no one
It was
knew,
not
really.
recorded.
Right.
Yeah.
It was recorded in the court because there were court cases that went because of this accident, but he didn't know of them. And so when I made him aware of it, and he kept saying, well, it really wasn't his fault, it really wasn't Pinky's fault. And I said, you've got to realize that, I said, today, if someone was driving a truck of alcohol, let's say, and yes, it might be that person's problem if they're drunk or if they run a stop sign, all that, but the fact of the matter is, it would be held responsible the company they're working for. That's why everybody is drug tested and all this stuff.
Yeah.
It would be the person who is the company that would be held
Responsible.
But they said, well, because he didn't have a W-2 form, which when you're doing illegal activities, most people don't get W-2 forms.
So you're not reporting to the IRS, is
You're
what
not
you're telling
reporting.
me. So there's another felony there.
Yeah, and I'm talking about a huge business. I think it was back in 1951 or 53, maybe it was. It was reported that he made over $3 million.
Oh my goodness! In that time,
In his legal operation. That had nothing to do with the illegal. And his illegal was all over West Texas, the north part of West, around Lubbock, Amarillo, all of these small towns and stuff,
Where there was a need.
They didn't have ready access. Where he had his business really was in Odessa, and so it was. He had. I can't even imagine how much money he made over and above that with his illegal business.
that's incredible. And well, I'm sorry, I'm just having a really hard time even, wrapping my head around this, even though I've talked to you before and I've read your book and, know all the details and stuff. So the one thing, though, that is popping into my head, and I got this from the book, was that when Pinky did die, because apparently he was glorified as this incredible philanthropist and had done so many good deeds for...
Well, and in 1953, I think it was 2 years after the accident of my parents, he was given by the lawyers in the state of Texas award for being the person who most upheld justice in Texas.
Oh my goodness, what a slap in the face.
Yes.
But of course, at that point, you were still a little girl, too young.
Yes, absolutely.
And you didn't even know a lot of the details.
I didn't know any of them, frankly. I knew all I knew was that my parents were killed in a car wreck, and I did, when I was about, I guess maybe 10, I found an article from the newspaper that in my grandmother's closet or something that talked about the accident. And so what that said was what I knew. That was all.
So you even tried to talk about it on occasion, like with your grandparents, to get some more of the details, but you were raised in a loving family, but nobody wanted to show their feelings, apparently.
It wasn't exactly like I tried to talk to them, or let's say, okay, let's talk about this. Yes. It didn't go like that, because, there is this tension in the air around that. And it's like, sometimes it would come up just because it came up, but there was this feeling that don't say more.
You're right, though, the way you described it as a tension, because it is something that's almost palpable. It's almost like walking into a room where there's something awful going on, and it's just like, okay, if I go any further, something really terrible is happening. But everybody, in my opinion, was kind of bottling up their feelings, and in a way maybe trying to protect each other. So
right. And in my family, it wasn't like I was ever, like, if I cried or something, I was never told, don't stop crying or anything like that. But it wasn't exactly like we were really emotionally talked about, well, how did you feel about this? We didn't do that either. It's like adults, if you saw an adult cry, when I was a child, it was like, oh my goodness, I mean, I don't remember ever seeing my grandpa cry until I talk in the book a little bit about one night when he got real upset. And then another time when my grandmother was in the hospital, he didn't exactly cry, but I could see a little tear in his eye, and I was like, "Oh my goodness!"
Well, that kind of rocked your world.
He was a big, strong farmer.
Farmers don't cry. There's no crying in farming.
There's no crying in Farmersville. Oh, well, not really.
Well, that's really funny that you should mention that, because I mean, how old was I when I saw my dad cry? I was probably 14 when my grandfather, and it wasn't his dad, it was his father-in-law, my mother's dad, and it was like, holy cow! I mean, and he was just.
Right.
But he had gone off like behind the house and stuff, so nobody could see him and everything. It's like, oh my God, Mom, what's wrong with Daddy? And we've never seen this before. But it is upsetting. But on the other hand, it's kind of reassuring to know that we all have feelings.
Right. I mean, the only reason it's upsetting is because we never saw it before, and we didn't know that they did that, and it's like, we didn't talk about that. And then even after it happens, you don't talk about it. Right. And so that's the only reason it's upsetting, because really, as I tell my patients in my practice, because I do some emotional work in my practice called NET, but, I've never seen on a death certificate crying be the reason that someone died.
Maybe lack of would.
But that's what I tell them. I said, but by holding it in and stressing out over it or trying to hold it back, not allowing it, I'm sure that's created a lot of illnesses,
Which is a nice segue, if you don't mind, that we could talk a little bit about the NET.
Sure.
Because it was fascinating. The first time I met you, you were speaking at a large group, and you actually told us a little bit about your background, told us about the NET, and then you did a little bit of a demonstration on 2 different people. And then when I met you at your office about 2 weeks ago, you did some with me, and it was just pretty mind-boggling. But go ahead and just tell us a bit about it.
Well, NET, you can find it online at netmindbody.com. And it, when you are working with people who have physical problems, there comes a point that you can see there's something else here besides needing another adjustment, or there's something else here besides just massaging. And oftentimes what I find in my practice, I adjust them, or maybe I do some massage or something and it still hurts. Why would that be? And oftentimes it might be something emotional. And it is like when we get stressed, what happens to that? It gets oftentimes locked in our body in such a way that we're not even aware of. So when people have a backache or a neck ache or something, there's lots to consider. Yes, the joints may not move quite properly, and the muscle may be, and if that's all it takes, that's great. But if it still hurts, then you have to look a little further. And then sometimes it might not be that muscle hurts or their neck hurts or anything. Somebody can just come in and say, I'm really upset about this or that. And can you help me?
Boy, that makes your job easier.
It does make it easy, because sometimes I say, oh man, here's a new patient. The first thing that comes up is something emotional. It's like, well, what would you say if I asked, do you think something emotional about this? And when I first started this, people would go, well, I don't think that's possible. No, Sometimes, not all the times. But now it's very rare, because we have opened up as a society about emotions so much that even children, I treat quite a few children, and what a gift to them to take emotional trauma off, so that they don't wait until they're 35 or 45 or whatever, to be able to normalize that physiology in them and help them with their emotions and the stress. It's so great. It's so great.
I want to emphasize the change in the physiology, because that's one thing. I used to hear that a lot, when I was in my Western medicine mind world, which, thank goodness I broke through. But used to hear that a lot, that, your emotions are trapped in your body, and it's stuck in here, and it's stuck. And I thought that was so stupid, because it never made any sense to me until I started to study a little bit more deeply after I'd gone to physical therapy school and start to study things like Feldenkrais and a lot of other alternative methods. And now it makes perfect sense, because when you don't process the trauma or the emotion that you're feeling, that is actually changing your physiology. It's changing your nervous system, your hormones, your immune system, the whole thing. So go ahead, if you could talk a little more about that.
Well, one day I had lunch it was a big meeting, but the man I just happened to sit beside, I told him a little bit about the ENT. He says, that's interesting you say that, because his wife had died, and this was probably about 10 years before. But he said, it had been about a year since my wife had died, and I went to get a massage. And he said, I laid on that table, and I just started crying. He said, I cried the whole massage. And he said, I just boo-hooed. And he said, when I got through, the massage therapist said, that I'm going to give you this session for free. Because she was so touched that he could just let it go. But he said, I tell you what, after that, I was a new man. He said, I didn't realize, because all the time, we're putting on our pants and going to work and having to be in the world in a certain way, and not just able to sit with myself. But yet when you lie down for a massage, there you are. And, I've often said there's not anybody that's done any body work, whether it be Feldenkrais, whether it be massage, Rolfing, chiropractic, I don't care what it is, that you haven't just touched someone and they start crying.
This is so funny, because I like to call myself the ice maiden. I don't do emotions. I have no feelings. And I remember when I was going through a really rough time in my life, and I was really bottling things in, because I kind of had to. And anytime I would try and get help, or, and I've talked about this before in the podcast, I was told, oh, that can't happen, and you're making it up, and suck it up, and, other people have real problems, blah, blah, blah. And I remember one time, and I had a particularly bad day, and I went to have some acupuncture with a friend of mine who actually does facial rejuvenation acupuncture, which is really effective. But anyway, I got on the table, and she's such a bubbly person. And she's talking, and finally she said, you seem a little down today. And I just lost it. And I just started bawling, and she's like, oh. And I says, I'm so sorry. I never cry in front of people. I'm going on. And finally she says, I'm so honored that you feel safe in my office, that you can let this go.
Absolutely.
And I thought, okay, whatever. I'm not sure what that means, but yeah.
But, honestly, everyone, that has any experience on them at all, you've been somewhere when someone all of a sudden just can't cope anymore, and they just break down. So that tells you that we're carrying around that person probably an hour before didn't know they were going to do that, but they've carried it, and it finally at some point, see, our body adapts and does the best it can for you, but at some point it has to come out. A breaking point. Yeah, it has to come out. And sometimes it comes out in not very pretty ways, like all kinds of illegal things, like killing someone, or and I'm not saying that that's all emotional. I don't know that, but I know that,
or even like suicide and self-abuse,
and saying things that then later we wish we hadn't said, and doing things that even though they might not be illegal or whatever, then later that I shouldn't have done that. I was so upset I did it, or I was so angry I did it. So, we know that we're pushed in our life a lot of times by our emotions.
So tell me how you got involved in the NET, because like I said, it's really powerful stuff.
Yeah, it's powerful,
but it's gentle, and that's one thing that I really liked about it. It was very gentle. Right. It didn't feel, because especially I don't like talking about emotions. I do laughter pretty well, but the other stuff I'm a little touchy about. But it felt so non-intrusive. Right. And a lot of times when people want to work with me, around my emotions, and that's why the shield comes up, it's like, stand back, because it feels kind of intrusive and almost more about the practitioner than it is about the person.
Right. So and it can feel that way. And that's why, one of the things that is really taught is that you have to ask permission to do it. And if a person says no, and I've had people say no, I just go on to the next thing. And it's not personal about me. It's like, if you said, it's like getting I was going to say a pedicure. Sometimes you don't want them to cut your toenail a certain way, and you say, I don't want that. Well, people can tell me what they don't want too. I always say that, when you go to a doctor, like, you're in control. And so if you ask me, some people will say, I don't want you to do any popping on my back, and they've had experience, they don't like that. So I don't do it. Some people say, you need to stay away from this area or something, I do. And the same thing is like, well, if they don't want any emotional work,
right,
I do. Because, we can't push emotional work. It doesn't work to push it, because that just makes more resistance.
But I think just being able to respect people's boundaries and even inviting that in, I won't do it if you don't want it. It's
Absolutely.
Up to you, whatever you want. And I think that people listening to this podcast, I really want them to write that down. Because a lot of times, especially if we go into, going back to traditional medicine, walk into a doctor's office, which is, kind of like how I got traumatized. Where like, well, they know better, or it's for our own good, or I can't say anything. And, if something doesn't feel right, and if you say, well, this doesn't feel right, or I'm not comfortable with that, and if the person, continues to push, you just grab your purse and leave.
Right. I know that these things happen to people. Just the other day, I talked to a cousin of mine who had gone in to the doctor for something, and because she said, well, when they proposed what to do, and she says, well, I don't really want that. She said, he just got it and walked out.
Good.
And she's probably best off for it, but it left her like, well, it's like, there's not an option, there's not an alternative or something like that. And he had actually told her previously, come in when you're ready for this. And so it's like, it leaves people hanging. I don't like that at all. It's not, but it's not what most doctors do.
Exactly.
And so there's going to be outliers in every field,
every field.
And so what helps is if a patient will go ahead and say, I don't want this, and not after it's done.
Yeah, that's much better if they say it beforehand.
Yeah, and
there's
so
no do-over.
Yeah, I tell people, if you don't want it, just let me know. But oftentimes, like with the emotional work, people might. I kind of, sometimes when I first see a patient, I kind of, if I had my druthers, it wouldn't come up, because you don't really, when I say, well, if something emotional comes, you don't know what they're going to talk about,
Exactly.
And so it's nice to have a little bit of a relationship first.
Right. Build that trust.
Yeah. So that they can feel safe, like
and
that person
comfortable.
said. Yeah. So I've always, when someone says, well, I'm afraid I might cry or something, I said, well, I've got lots of Kleenexes, no problem, So it's a matter of being in a place that you can. You can. And, most of the time when I do the emotional work, they don't cry. But once in a while, people will cry. Most of the time, I don't remember a child crying.
Isn't that amazing?
Isn't that amazing? Because you know what? Most of the parents who would bring that child in have brought them in because they've already been bringing them in when something emotional happens.
Okay.
Now, when they get more of teenage years, then you know how that is. They're going to cry a little bit more maybe. But little children, they'll just tell me what happened and how they felt about it, and we'll do the work on it, and they're fine with it.
Well, I think kids are just so resilient.
Right.
And far more resilient than, the teenagers once the hormones kick in. We all remember that. But I think kids are just so resilient.
They are very resilient, but what I have to say here is it's the parents those children have that have made it okay for them to have emotions to begin with. Do you see what I mean? There are still children out there that are not allowed their emotions. The way when people ask me, well, what do you mean when we hold emotions in our body? I say, well, just have you ever seen someone say to their child, stop it, stop crying right now, stop it right now? And you see this child make all these kind of faces and kind of move their body around a little bit, trying to stop it. And that's where it gets hidden, you see, that they're trying to push down on these emotions that they were letting out. And so, there's a lot of people that have, like I said, I never had that. My grandparents, they'd already raised 4 children. They knew kind of how to do it, I guess. But children who are, forbidden to have that feeling in the moment, they're going to have to stuff it in their body.
Let's talk a little bit more about that, because when you're stuffing the emotions and, I'm going back to the physiological component of it, and you're stuffing those emotions, it's actually impacting your organ function at every level.
Organ function, structural function. I'll just give you an example. One time I had this woman, and she flew around all over teaching, and one day she called me I'm at the airport, I've got to come in. Okay, come in. She came in, and she was bent over. She said, I got off the plane. I couldn't even walk off. She was completely bent over.
Oh, wow.
And she said, I've got 3 days. You got to get me back on the airplane in 3 days. I said, okay. So the first day, when she walked out, she looked sort of the same way as she walked in. Second day, she looked sort of the same way walking out as she walked in. Third day, it's like I'm really on the spot here. But she looks just like she did that first day. And I had kind of worked, I said, oh, maybe it's emotional. And I checked, and it was emotional. And it went back to a time that when she was a kid and something about her brother. And she goes, I don't care about that. I said, I know you don't. See, in our head, a lot of times we've figured things out. But in our body is something else. And I said, I know you don't, but your body does. And she said, okay. And I did that one thing. She stood up, walked out, and I was like, oh my goodness. It was the emotional part that was the hang up. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was something that really she didn't feel like she had any feelings about. She didn't cry. She didn't say, oh, he hurt my feelings. I don't even remember what it was about. But she didn't have any need to go revisit what happened with her and her brother. But it affected her body.
So from a cognitive standpoint, it was no big deal.
Not to her.
But from a somatic body standpoint, her body was still ticked off about it.
Was still saying, I need some attention here.
Yeah.
And this brings me to the fact that a lot of people who've had therapy, you have to realize that when you've had therapy, I'm a proponent. I was 16 years plus in therapy, and you really can learn to understand. But that's all in your mind. What about your body? I always say you got to bring your body along for the ride, you see. And you take, for instance, me. I was 19 months old when my parents died. And so you couldn't say, well, do you remember when your parents died? No, I don't. Mm-hmm. It's the body's memory. Mm-hmm. And so we have to recognize that even if we've worked things out in our mind, mm-hmm. I remember meeting the woman once that said, well, I've been in therapy 10 years, but I still do. I understand why I do what I do, but I still do it. And I thought, wow.
There's a little disconnect there, huh?
There's a little disconnect there because, honestly, sometimes it's because the emotions have not been, the body, the mm-hmm. emotions in the body have not been addressed. Mm-hmm. Now, I have to say, the therapists do address emotions, but this is addressed a little differently, maybe. Mm-hmm. It's like they address emotions in that if you feel like crying, you can cry. And mm-hmm. there is a safe place there mm-hmm. to do that. Mm-hmm. Or you can be angry or whatever, Mm-hmm. But that's different than finding what was stuck. Mm-hmm. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. Usually, like for instance, if I were thinking about a time that something happened and I get emotional about it, that's in my mind. Mm-hmm. That's not my body. Mm-hmm. Do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to ask you this because I know that you were injured in the accident. And actually, if I remember correctly from the book, they actually had to kind of like get you out or pry you out mm-hmm. from underneath the dashboard. Yeah. So you actually had some physical injuries. Mm-hmm. Did you break your leg?
No, my sister broke her leg. But for me, what happened, I was in the front seat between my mother and father. And when we were hit, it pushed the car into kind of a telephone pole. My mother hit that telephone pole and died instantly. Oh. And I think she had, I don't know if she had pushed me aside or whatever, but the dash of the car, came back into the car, right? And or I don't exactly know. The weight of me flew forward, and the dash kind of
went backwards.
Went back over me, and so I was actually the man who I talked with, who was the 10-year-old boy at the time. He told me that his dad couldn't find me. He could hear me. His dad had come to the scene, and he said his dad could not find me, but he could hear me. And so he kept looking. And he could find my sister easily. She was in the back seat. He got her, and then he kept looking for me until finally he raised the hood of the car, and I was under there. I had some cuts and stuff that, metal cuts, and he found me under the hood of the car.
Oh my goodness. Wow. So that leads me to one question, or first one that I have for you, is that how do you recover or how do you heal from that kind of trauma?
Mm-hmm. The thing about healing is kind of like aging. Mm-hmm. First you're 1, mm-hmm. and then you're 2, mm-hmm. and then you're 3. And you think, well, I want to heal from this and I want to heal right this second. Mm-hmm. Well, it doesn't work that way. Mm-hmm. It takes time if you've had the kind of trauma that I had. Mm-hmm. Now, there are things that, listen, people can be traumatized all the time. You can fall out of a swing and be mm-hmm. traumatized from it. But a lot of times something like some rescue remedy or something like that will help that. And but a big trauma takes a while to unwind from. Mm-hmm. And when I say it takes a while, it can take years. Mm-hmm. At one time, what happened when I, kind of started my book, I had kind of realized, hey, this wasn't going to be a real short process. I'd kind of come to that conclusion, but I thought, well, that's what my life is about. Mm-hmm. And, maybe it's what most people's lives about. I mean, if you don't do anything else but heal, mm-hmm. You've done yourself a big favor. It's mm-hmm. kind of like I say, at the end of my life, I want to be clear. Mm-hmm. When I'm on that deathbed or when I go to sleep one night and wake up somewhere else, mm-hmm. I'm hoping that I'm clear of the emotional issues mm-hmm. that as much as possible. Look,
mm-hmm.
None of us we're still human beings, and who knows if it'll all be done. But I want to know that I have done the work that I can do to be clear of any of the resentments or anger or feelings that hold me in a certain way. And when I say hold me, I mean energetic hold on me, that I can't participate in a full and loving way in life because I have this hanging over my head, sort of, which is what it often feels like. It's a bit profound because you think, well, I'll take 1 year to heal. It doesn't work that way.
Or if I'm not completely over this by this time and date, then I have somehow failed.
Right.
Which would re-traumatize you all over again just by the negative input.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't work that way. And as things come up, we deal with it. And so as we get a threat, it's kind of like, one time this man told me that, he told me that he had this little string. This woman had this string on her clothes, and he said, well, I just pulled it. And he said, well, he wasn't very old. I think he was sort of a teenager, and he pulled this string and her skirt fell down. And it's kind of like that, we have to pull on the string, which is what I call the thread of our life. And you pull, and if you've ever taken apart something like that, that there's a lot of work trying to get this knot out or that knot out.
Right.
And so it may take a long time to get to that part where it just pulls easily. And then you pull for a while, like if you have a spool of thread that maybe a cat got hold of, you pull for a while, and then guess what? There's not, and you have to stop. And our life is kind of like that. We have all had times where, hey, that was a pretty easy time. Yeah. And we all have parts where we've gone through a lot. And I consider those the knots in that thread of life that we have to undo. And I don't want to end with just a whole lot of knots inside me.
So basically, I think the moral of the story is start pulling those threads in a way that your skirt doesn't fall down around your ankles.
Well, that's a good one. That's just something that our mind can play with. Because really, when we pull on the thread of our life, their emotional life, and you say, I'm going to look at this deeper, and I'm going to go deeper, and I go deeper. In a certain way, there comes a point, even though I might be crying, there's a joyfulness about it. And if you don't find that joyfulness about understanding yourself, understanding, oh, that's why life went this, or that's how I went this way because life went this way, or, understanding your story, okay? Everybody has a story, and we want to understand it. And as you understand it, it puts things in a certain perspective for you. And at the end, see, I want to be completely done with my story. We're all I want to get rid of my story. Well, don't we all? But, you notice you wake up the next day and there that story's there, right?
It's just staring you right in the face.
And so, when you pull the threads of your life and you unknot where they're knots, and what I want to be able to think of on my deathbed is that I have a whole skein of thread with no knots.
Oh. Well, Elva, it has been so delightful having you here, and I definitely want you to come back because there's a lot more we can talk about and a lot more to cover and uncover and discover. But so tell people how to get a hold of you. You have a practice in Lakewood,
right? Correct. So I have a practice in Lakewood, Colorado, and my the number for my practice is 303-980-4001, and I often get emails or something, and my email is Elva, my first name, ELVA, at eastcentral.com. And I have a website, drelvaedwards.com.
And do you ever consult with people who aren't local?
I have. It depends kind of on what they're... A lot of times I have to have the body in front of me, but sometimes I can give them a referral.
Okay, excellent.
And sometimes, sometimes I do in regards to maybe emotional things or something like that. Yeah.
Okay, I wondered about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to be able to offer even just some guidance or direction, referrals,
or physical,
etc.
anything really. If people had a question, I don't mind them asking. Yeah.
Wonderful. And then, of course, your book, again, is A Texas Tragedy, Orphaned by Bootleggers. And it's an incredible book. I mean, wow. I mean, I went through it. I just couldn't put it down.
Thank you.
And I just really got involved in the characters. And I want to have you back for many, many reasons, but I do want to talk a little bit more about some of the details of the book and what happened when you started researching.
Right.
But where can our listeners find your book?
Well, you can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Kindle, or you can get it, there's two of them on the Amazon. Okay. One of them, the very first picture has a highway on. I mean, the picture on the front of the book, there's a highway. And the other one does not have a highway. Okay. And what happened is so much happened from the time I wrote the book until recently. I wanted to update it. And the one that does not have the highway is the latest. Okay. And what it has is an epilogue that is not available in the first one where I actually had books. Okay. Now the one that doesn't have the highway is just Kindle. Okay. It's not an actual, you can't. Book. Yeah. Okay. And so I wanted to bring people up to date because in my book, one of the things I did is try to get hold of those 10 other orphans. And I never was able to really. And so one day out of the blue in 2014, one of those orphans called me. Wow. And so I updated the book. I went down to Texas and met 2 of them.
Is that in this copy that I have?
No.
Okay.
No, it is in the epilogue. It's the other one. And so I wanted to put that out there too because I feel like in some way I have represented the whole accident and they were part of it. Right. And I wanted their experience to be, I mean, I didn't tell too much personal stuff. That's their business. But they didn't have this man said, it was great because 6 of those 10 children went to an orphanage.
Yeah. Oh God. I read that and I was just like, I wanted to find this man and beat him with a stick.
And so, it was, I consider it difficult, some of the things they told me. One of the things I have just a real difficult time is like someone getting beat or something like that. And I felt like that, some of the physicalness in the orphanage was not necessary. Because what they would do is they would make the kids hit the other kids.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
But in the end, basically, you were a voice for the voiceless in some way because you were at least able to bring some type of, I don't want to say closure, but some sense of what happened and the sequence of events, and that you were a little bit, forgive me for putting it this way, and I mean this with all the love in my heart and respect because I'm the same way, of like a dog with a bone. It's like I'm just going to keep on.
I was a dog with a bone.
I'm going to chew on this and chew on this until I'm satisfied. So you really did that, and you're a warrior. And, you're a warrior.
I was a warrior after the truth. Of what happened.
Exactly. Yes. And I really, really admire that because a lot of people would just, kind of walk away or shrug their shoulders, but you were a warrior after the truth.
It's not only the truth of what happened with my parents and what happened at the accident, but the truth in how it affected me. Yeah. And the truth how it affected those other people.
Yeah. And I think that's what people don't realize when something like that happens, the tendrils of so many people and their lives are affected and how it's affected. So.
Yes. And it really had a large effect. Like, for instance, the man that I talked with, who was the 10-year-old boy, when this article came out in Texas, it was a Sunday special feature, and he said his son called him and said, "Dad, You know that accident you've always talked about? Okay. He said, I think there's a story about it. You need to get the paper, read that story.
Oh, my.
And then he did. And then the next day he said, my wife made me call you. She said, I had to call you.
Yeah, she knew.
So you see the ripples?
Yeah.
Even this man's children knew about that story.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, you will come back, won't you?
I will.
Okay. Well, once again, thank you so much for being here. And I have to tell you, you truly embody the spirit of the FemiNinja. You are a warrior and seeking the truth, and that's basically what this podcast is all about, and helping people. So I really appreciate you being here.
Well, thanks so much. I enjoyed it.
Well, we'll do it again real soon.
Great.
And everybody, thank you so much for listening, and make sure you check out Elva's website and check out her book. It really is a fascinating story and very, very heartfelt and beautifully written. So thank you so much, and until next time, bye. And that's a wrap on another episode of the FemiNinja Project. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, be safe, be strong, and until next time, bye now.